Hello and welcome to On Second Thought, a bonus series from And the Runner-Up Is. On December 12th, 2018, I released the episode of And the Runner-Up Is on the 1980 Best Picture race, where we discussed Raging Bull as the likely runner-up that lost Best Picture to Ordinary People. But on second thought, what if the runner-up was really Coal Miner's Daughter?
Ever since you left me, I've done nothing but wrong. Many nights I've laid awake and cried. We were so happy, my heart was in a whirl. But now I'm a
Hello and welcome back to On Second Thought, a bonus series of And the Runner-Up Is, where we discuss another Best Picture nominee that we did not cover on the regular show. On the main show, we talked about Raging Bull for 1980 as the runner-up to Ordinary People, but instead today we are discussing whether it could have been Coal Miner's Daughter. Once again, three very different movies. My guests today I'm very excited to have on. They are the co-hosts of one of my favorite new podcasts, I'll just say it, that I've been listening to recently, Oscar Wilde, which of course is an Oscar-themed podcast. Please welcome to the show for the first time, first off, Sophia Ciminello. Welcome.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to talk about one of my favorite Oscar staples, the biopic about a musician.
Yes,
Say
tried
that
and true.
facetiously.
Yes. And Nick Ruhrkraut. Welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me. Yeah, I'm excited to be here. As you know, we love Oscars talk, so I'm ready.
Yes, we've been talking a lot about the current Oscars as of late. Now we're flashing back 40 years ago to talk about this race. So let's just jump right in. So, Coal Miner's Daughter is a musical biopic about the life of country singer Loretta Lynn, and the film tracks her childhood in Butcher Hollow, Kentucky, growing up with her many, many siblings, meeting a man named Doolittle, who she ends up marrying, and really she discovers her voice in many respects, I could say. She has a bunch of kids, and she splits her time devoting her life to them and also going out and making a name for herself in the country music scene, playing the Grand Ole Opry. Eventually she befriends Patsy Cline, dealing with the struggles of fame, and having many, many conflicts with her husband. The film was directed by Michael Apted and written by Tom Rickman, and it stars Sissy Spacek as Loretta Lynn, Tommy Lee Jones as Doolittle, Beverly D'Angelo as Patsy Cline, and Levon Helm and Phyllis Boyens as Loretta's parents. And Coal Miner's Daughter made $67 million at the U.S. box office, making it one of the highest-grossing films of 1980. And it scored 7 Oscar nominations, winning 1, but of course that one was not Best Picture. So let's go first to Sophia. I don't know if you've seen Coal Miner's Daughter before, but what are your thoughts on Coal Miner's Daughter?
Yeah, so this was actually my first time watching Coal Miner's Daughter, which is odd because I've seen a lot of Sissy Spacek movies and TV before, but this one I had just put off, I think, because it was a biopic, and I was really pleasantly surprised. I think that Sissy's performance is incredible. I think that she has this really interesting, youthful vibe where she can be really relatable naturally, but then she's used to being in really complex roles. That being said, I think the way that the film is, it is very standard biopic. So while I like Sissy's performance, I think it did leave me wanting a little bit more from it.
Yeah, that's fair. How about you, Nick?
I enjoyed the movie. This was my first time watching, and I'm slightly embarrassed to say this is maybe the first Sissy Spacek lead starring film that I've seen. But I enjoyed it, and I was actually pleasantly surprised by the story and the music, and we can get into Sissy's background and how they perform the songs. But It is a pretty typical biopic, but I don't know. I guess I fell into the tropes and just loving the 2 hour runtime. Even it didn't seem long to me. So
Yeah, it does fly by pretty fast, I will say, for better or for worse, I would say. Well, I think it's important to think about the context when we discuss a movie like Coal Miner's Daughter. I remember on the main show talking about how, because I did my mini review of Coal Miner's Daughter there, didn't get into too much thoughts, but I mentioned that there weren't many music biopics really that were like this leading up to this point. I mean, I did also want to clarify that, of course, there were music biopics in general, like Lady Sings the Blues, of course, and Funny Girl, things like that. But I think there's a particular type of music biopic that this really helps to, I guess, standardize what we would see moving forward decades later and not have too much variation. Thinking, of course, of movies like Walk the Line and Ray, and very recently with Bohemian Rhapsody, Rocket Man, even Straight Outta Compton. I mean, United States versus Billie Holiday, you could even argue.
Judy, yep.
Yeah, lots of similar stories kind of about, like, you know, humble beginnings and getting the first brush of success, dealing with all the drama of the personal life, and then, of course, you're struggling to adjust to fame. Usually there's some sort of hospitalization. I mean, it's very standard. And I think it sort of tackles a few of the darker elements of the musician's life, but not to the extent that it, like, alienates the audience, the mainstream audience, the core fan base that would be excited to watch a movie about their favorite artist's life, you know? But I will say with this, I don't think this is like high art by any means, but Michael Apted, he comes from the world of documentary film, and I think he does bring kind of a human touch to this that is less theatrical than it would be in another director's hands, I guess. So, yeah, I think it's just very natural conversations, and it's not really flashy direction by any means. But it sort of just works when you're in the context of the film, I suppose, even if it doesn't leave a lasting impact ultimately. So, yeah, even though the plot points are pretty familiar to us, the rags to riches story, I guess I just find the actual scenes and the interplay to be natural and free-flowing.
I totally agree. I think that it's so easy to watch. And I think when I said I was left wanting more, part of that is just, I think whenever the celebrity that the biopic is about is still alive, you know, Loretta Lynn, she said, you can tell the truth. Like, you can go for it, but clearly she's alive and she's a big star. They're not going to go all out and show those darker parts that are there probably. So I think that's always the risk that you run when you're making something about someone who's very popular, very beloved, very, much alive and involved in the process. So I think I just was wondering what this could have been, if it was made later or if she wouldn't have been involved in the project as much.
Yeah. And she is still alive, by the way,
Right.
She's still releasing music. So,
yeah.
Yeah. She's had a long life. Yeah. So Loretta Lynn actually picked out Sissy Spacek herself to play her. Just like picked her out of a group of photos. Apparently she didn't even really know her. I think that ended up being the correct choice. Very, very inspired casting on Loretta's part. Yeah, I know it's based on her autobiography that she co-wrote. So there is definitely a level of control here that I think we definitely see. I would say that she does come off in a very flattering light overall. Like, we're not seeing too much bad stuff when it comes to her. A lot of it is more to the husband, which we can definitely get into.
And reading back into articles and reviews, they mentioned how, she struggled with drugs at a time, and I kind of even forgot. I watched it this week and I had forgotten that she was using drugs or anything. And I was like, and I think it comes back to they portrayed her in such a positive light throughout the film. And that's partly in, wanting the audience to connect to her story and to her struggles. And really the most embarrassing part was when she gets up on stage and starts crying and breaks down. But even that moment isn't really embarrassing. You want to feel for her. So there are definitely aspects that, having the title be Coal Miner's Daughter, and I know it's a reference to her song and to her autobiography, but I guess I wanted more of the backstory to how much this had affected her, apart from growing up poor, maybe more of like a nomad land idea of this town that was supported by a certain industry and how that impacted the people specifically. There are a couple shots of the coal mine, and I think in one of the film's weaker aspects kind of fast forwards through things pretty quickly. And that to me was one of the things that they kind of sped through to get through the dad storyline and where she grew up.
By the way, just you mentioning Nomadland makes me want to think of a scenario where Sissy Spacek played Fern in Nomadland. Scenarios.
Yeah. Oh my God. I've been thinking, we've been talking a little bit about like different actresses who could have played Fern, since Fran really seems like the only one. And she's on my like short list of people who could maybe have done it, because she has that rural, quirky charm. And when you see her, it's going to be good, whatever you're watching.
It's true. But yeah, I would agree. I do think that the film goes by fast, as I said earlier, even though it takes about, I remember timing it like 50 minutes to the point where she's actually up on stage, like singing in front of people, which feels like it's like half the movie. But watching it, I was like, this is going by fast. But then once we get to the point of her breaking down and talking about how everything has happened so fast, it sort of like suits what her experience was in some ways, where I felt like it sort of connected, that this felt so fast paced that like we spent all this time before she became who she is. And then suddenly, like the rest of the film, she's like suddenly at the Grand Ole Opry and she's meeting Patsy Cline, and Patsy Cline, something bad happens to her, which we'll get to. And then she's dealing with all this stuff in her marriage, and she's going on tour and everything. And then that's all very, very fast. And I think in a weird way that does sort of suit what she is going through in that breakdown scene, which is where I think most of the film is sort of leading to, I would say. But I do want to just stop down and talk about Sissy's actual performance here. I think she's pretty phenomenal, and I think it's easy to see why she won almost all of the awards leading up to Oscar night. And I can't even imagine that this was an easy role to play, especially in the beginning of the film, where she is supposed to be like 13 to 15 and she's still the same. It's not like a younger actress is playing her at that time. She's playing Loretta Lynn for like 20 plus years. And I would say pretty convincing the whole time. I don't know if you disagree.
Yeah, I completely agree. When they said she was 14 at the beginning, I thought, oh my God, this woman is playing a 14-year-old so convincingly. And she then is, has all of these kids and has this full career. And I think at the beginning, what is so perfect about the Sissy Spacek casting, and what makes it, I think, even wilder that Loretta Lynn just picked her from a stack of photos, is that she has that quality of someone, like I said, who's relatable, but she always looks somehow at the same time very youthful, but also like she's lived this long, incredible life. It's quite a conundrum just looking at her face as an actress. And I think too, even with, thinking about this Oscar year and everything, I won't get to the other nominees, but what I found really incredible about Sissy was that, she does all of her own singing, and the way that she plays a singer discovering her talents at the beginning, I found that part really compelling. Even though I think the beginning and the time jumps do go kind of quickly, she makes it really believable how her journey starts and how passionate she becomes about singing.
Yeah, I agree. And she also has a shyness to her in the beginning that's interesting. and not really always expressing her opinions on things. But there's also that look in her eyes that I think you're kind of talking about as well, that she's kind of wise beyond her years in some ways. And she's very observant. She's just got those very distinct Sissy Spacek eyes, you know. There's no other actress that can really have those kind of eyes watching you. And yeah, I just think she's able to evolve over time, and I feel like she's very careful in allowing more of herself to open up over time as she becomes more of who she really is and wants to be. And I think it's a deceptively smart performance that she's giving that is, again, much more difficult than it looks.
I think that would terrify me if, you know, they came to me and said, you know, you're going to play a child and then eventually this iconic country singer. And she is convincing. I do really love her here, and being maybe the first film that I've seen of her, it's incredible. I think I was shocked by her voice, and when I read that she did sing all the music, because it's so clear, her accent is so believable, and it was so fluid in seeing her age, but not in like striking or too flamboyant of a way.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I'm just thinking of a few scenes where she kind of explodes in a way, like when they're on the road and they're going to all the radio stations, and there's that one DJ that hasn't played her record, and she just like goes off on him suddenly. Like, I feel like she can be so meek and vulnerable in 1 second and then just completely explode in the next, and then still have it feel like the same character, where it makes sense that she would react in that way. It's really quite remarkable, and there's almost an earnestness to her where it's like she knows what she wants, and then those moments where she actually gets up the courage to express what she wants, I think, are some of the best scenes in the film. I wanted even more of those types of scenes.
Yeah, she has so much range. I think that's also what was so surprising. In some of the early moments, she gets raped on her wedding night, I believe, and that is so terrible to watch, because you hear her screaming and saying no, and you know, and then moments later she's happy, she's on the couch, and they're this married couple interacting, and later on she grows and matures. So I think it's the highs and lows and experiencing all of that she does so convincingly and so well.
Yeah, I think that this film, and Sissy specifically, it's a really interesting contrast between like hypermasculinity and very kind of innocent femininity, because at the beginning, the way that it starts, it's very just loud and rural, and you see all of these men and just Sissy in the middle of them, right? And then with the scene that you're talking about, Nick, and even at the radio station, then you can see her kind of becoming this fierce woman who knows what she wants and goes after it, and is able to, I think, communicate what she wants and what she can't handle. So I really like the radio station scene a lot.
Well, let's also dive deeper into the Tommy Lee Jones element to this movie, playing Doolittle Lynn. What do we think of him? He does not get nominated for this, but is a pretty sizable portion of the movie, to the point that you could probably say he's a co-lead. What do we make of Tommy here?
Nick, you can go first.
I think he does a great job. I had issues with the patriarchal aspect of, you know, this is her story, but in making him look like a lead, they almost try to say that he had such a large part with her becoming famous and becoming the star. So there are like a few aspects that I have from the film, but I think as an actor, he did a great job. All of this is emphasized by the screenplay. I love some of the lines in the film, and he delivers those really well. And I think in showcasing his struggle too, in wanting to help his wife out, kind of be her manager, but then later on get pushed to the back when she's really famous and he's basically just this house husband. And he's relegated, and other people tell him when Loretta's performing at the Grand Ole Opry and he's at the bar and they're like, oh, congrats, you can kind of just lay back and enjoy the ride now. And he's like, wait, but I don't want that. I want to like be there with her and push, push, push. So I think all of those highs and lows too, he does really well.
Yeah. I thought his performance was also great. I love seeing a young Tommy Lee Jones when he appeared. I was very excited because I knew we were in the hands of some great actors. I think too, I knew when this started, I was like, okay, we're going to have an insecure man plotline develop at some point. And, that did come to fruition. And I agree. I think that some of this is definitely like of the time of a movie made in 1980. And I always have to kind of put myself back in that time when I'm thinking about that. But he, I think, gives quite a good performance as her husband and shows, I think, through the screenplay too, definitely, but those underlying tensions that exist in a marriage when one person, or any relationship, when one person is like the famous one or getting more work, and especially here with the gender dynamics. The marital rape scene is very tough. I wrote down in my notes, no consent, please. Yikes. Not have this. But is also a very real thing. And it's something that I'm glad that they actually go into in her life, especially considering how we talked a little bit about this at the beginning, that, this is Loretta Lynn. She's alive. This is her story. And the fact that they did show something like that in her marriage, I think, makes it much more truthful of a biopic.
Yeah, and she had a quote where she said she didn't mind if they showed the bad stuff with her, which they again didn't really end up doing in my opinion, but
right.
She mentioned that she just didn't want her husband to be portrayed in a super duper negative light, which like in scenes like that, I mean, I would say that is not particularly great light, and I am sort of glad that they do cover that as well, like you said. But I do think he is really good here. I think he really toes the line between that guy who gets stuff done, and you can see why in the beginning that Loretta would kind of be attracted to him. He's just like not afraid to say what he wants, and he just devotes so much energy to her to the point of obsession almost. Yeah, early on we do get that dark side where he really hates to not be in control of a situation. And we have this scenario that does happen a lot where his wife becomes the star, and then suddenly he's in the background and he's been eclipsed, and he feels emasculated almost, and kind of useless. And especially when you think about the society that they grew up in, very traditional and patriarchal, it makes sense from his perspective, even though he's not a great guy by any means. But at the same time, you could see how much he still adores her, and he'll make these big grand gestures, and sometimes it's charming, and you can see why she would be like more wooed back by him, I'm not saying it's like a nice thing that this dynamic, but it exists in real life. So yeah, I think that's a really interesting dynamic to the film, that is this very evolving relationship from scene to scene. You don't know like where they're going to go, but by the end you see how she's forgiving of him, and they kind of just come to an understanding that they might drive each other crazy, but they're just kind of bonded after everything they've been through. So yeah, that's how I took it.
I mean, the charm worked on me, to be honest. Like when I was watching this, I was like, oh, he's a great guy. This is, I totally believe in this relationship at multiple parts through the movie, just how he takes care of her and cares for her throughout. So I totally agree.
At points, this reminded me of the relationship in Raging Bull between Jake and Vicky, where you where you imagine or just assume they're going to break up because they're having all this turmoil between them, and they don't. and they have kids and they continue to work together. So I thought that was pretty interesting, but also, like you said, Kevin, real life, and this happens in relationships. So they find their way of working it out, I guess. The maybe darkest moment comes when she finds him cheating on him in the car, or he's drunk and trying to get back and struggling to get on the bus. So yeah, I definitely don't think he was portrayed in the best light, but if this is more real life how he was, then I think good on them for, showing the good and the bad.
Thank you for listening to this preview of On Second Thought, a bonus series from And the Runner-Up Is. If you liked what you heard and want to hear more, please go to patreon.com/andtherunnerup-is and become a patron. Only $3 a month will get you access to bonus episodes, a Slack channel, and early access to regular episodes. Thank you so much for your consideration.